I was sitting in the doctor's waiting room when my phone rang. It was my only daughter, Melina. Her voice sounded strange, almost cold, as she said, "Mom, we're going on a trip to Europe tomorrow. I already sold your beach house and your car. We needed the money. Bye." And she hung up, just like that. 45 years raising her, sacrificing for her, and she discarded me like garbage. But I took a deep breath and smiled because there was something my dear daughter didn't know. Please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're hearing my story of revenge. I want to know how far it's gone. You know that moment when the world freezes and your ears catch up 2 beats later? That was me in that beige waiting room with wilted magazines and a fish tank gurgling in the corner. A nurse called a name that wasn't mine. A man coughed. Somewhere a clock ticked too loud. I stared at my phone and reread the last line of the call log, even though there wasn't anything to read, just Melina and the time. 37 seconds. 37 seconds to unravel a life. The car wasn't just a car. It was my husband's old Ford, the one he waxed on Sundays while I made lemonade and Melina drew hopscotch squares and chalk on the driveway. The beach house wasn't just a house. It was Summer's. It was first steps after scraped knees. It was a candlelit argument that ended in laughter. It was the smell of salt and old wood and the stubborn front door that always stuck in the humidity. It was where my husband, Robert, had kissed me on the jaw while paint stained our fingers and said, "We build things that last, Tony." And now my daughter had sold it with a sentence and a hang-up tone. Shame's a hot thing. It climbs your neck and makes your scalp tingle. But under the shame, I felt something cooler. A current. A memory. A manila envelope in the back of the file cabinet, behind the tax returns and faded report cards. "Do not open unless I'm gone," he'd written in that careful architect's print of his. He'd put it there 2 years before he died, just after the second heart scare, when he'd touched his chest and said, "Insurance and ducks all in a row." I hadn't opened it when the paramedics rolled him out and the night swallowed our house, nor at the cemetery when my palms pressed damp into the artificial grass by his headstone. I thought it was life insurance forms, some instructions for the lawn. And maybe it was. But now, as I stared at my silent phone in that waiting room, the envelope glowed in my mind like a lighthouse. I didn't storm, I didn't shout. I left my doctor's visit for another day and walked into the crisp sunlight, past a couple arguing in low voices about a prescription. I drove home in a borrowed car a neighbor had lent me while I got the Ford's oil changed. Funny that. It hit me that the Ford wasn't getting anything changed anymore. The house was too quiet when I unlocked the door. Robert used to say the house took a breath when we came in, like a dog wags its tail. That day, it was just walls and dust motes. I went straight to the file cabinet. He'd organized our lives with manila and labels. Electric, mortgage, dental. I reached behind the wills folder, way back where my fingers brushed cardboard and spiderweb. The envelope was there, sealed, my name written across it in that steady hand. Tony. I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water that I forgot to drink and slid a butter knife under the flap. Inside were deeds, share certificates, a typed letter. I trembled. The first line of the letter made my heart crawl up into my throat. If you're reading this, it means I've broken my promise to be here. Forgive me. By the time I reached, "I've invested quietly because I never liked the way money changes people," my hands were steady. He listed properties, little houses he'd bought during dips and let families live in for less than market rent because everyone needs a soft landing sometimes, Tony. There were municipal bonds, parcels of land, even a beach house deed in my maiden name for tax simplicity. He'd written, "And because your name deserves to be on things we love." There were shares in a lumber company I hadn't heard of since the 80s. And the truck? Officially in a trust with both our names. My throat made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. My husband had been quietly, carefully generous. He had built us a life beyond what we ever spoke of openly, because the luxury he believed in was security, not show. I called the number on the letter. The receptionist put me through. "Hello? This is Harold," came a voice like creaking leather. "Mr. Peterson, my name is Antonia Brooks. My husband, Robert Brooks, asked me to call you. I think it's time." There was a rustle of papers I couldn't see. "Ah, Mrs. Brooks, Robert said you might call one day. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I said. And then, because I still had a little petty left in me, "You're the boring one?" A low chuckle. "That's what he said, yes. I took it as a compliment. Can you come in this afternoon?" I went. His office smelled like old books and clean carpet. There were no flashy awards on the wall, just degrees and a framed picture of a Labrador with a bandana. He offered coffee. I took tea. He slid a folder toward me, crisp and organized, like all my husband's quiet love had been stacked into shape. He was kept things diversified. Robert was risk-averse, he said. "Sensible. You'll be comfortable, Mrs. Brooks. More than comfortable." "Comfortable," I repeated, tasting the word. "Comfortable," while my daughter sold my comfort out from under me. "Now," Mr. Peterson said, folding his hands, "I usually advise a cooling-off period for major decisions after a loss, but Robert anticipated that you might face pressures." I said, "Pressures named Melina," and he winced in that polite way lawyers do when you say something messy. "She's your daughter," he offered. "She's my daughter, and she is also the person who called me today to inform me that she's sold my beach house and my car without my consent." His eyebrows rose the slightest bit. "The beach house is in your name, and the truck is in a trust. Neither can be sold without your authorization." "Then she forged it, or she pretended, or she hasn't closed yet and she's bluffing." "We can look," he said, and he clicked and typed. It turned out she'd done what people who think they're smarter than the system always do, rushed. There was an MLS listing, but no recorded transfer for the beach house. As for the truck, I saw the listing on a marketplace app. A ridiculous price, like she'd been in a hurry to convert memory into cash. "Can we stop a sale that hasn't closed?" I asked. "We can make it difficult," he said, "but we can also be educational." I looked at him. Educational? He smiled. Robert wrote that word in a note to me. He didn't want me to bulldoze. He wanted his daughter to learn. "Then we'll teach," I said. "What would you do if it were your family?" He leaned back. "I'd secure the assets quietly. I'd move the beach house into a new trust with you as sole trustee and redefine any authorized parties. I'd notify the listing agent that there's no authority to sell and threaten a lawsuit they won't want. As for the truck, I'd let it be sold." Let it be sold? Sometimes a lesson requires a consequence you can count. We can buy it back out from under her, technically, through the trust. Or we can let the buyer file a complaint and watch Melina explain a fraudulent sale to the police. That tends to reframe a European itinerary. I pictured my daughter in handcuffs. The image didn't thrill me like it should have in a revenge fantasy. Revenge is funny. When it's your child, it isn't fireworks. It's a hard, cold stone you have to decide whether to drop into the river and watch sink, or to hold until your hand aches and you can place it somewhere it builds something. I said, "Let's not ruin her life." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Let's make her face it, and let's make sure she does it without knowing she's in a safety net." He nodded.
We'll need patience. I have it, I said, and I did. Grief had taught me patience. Love had taught me something sharper, how to wait and how to watch. That night, I made chicken soup I didn't want and poured a glass of wine I didn't finish. I took the framed picture of Robert and me at the beach house off the wall and sat with it in my lap. "You old fucks," I whispered to his smiling eyes. "You left me a treasure map and a sternly worded note." In the morning, an email dropped in my inbox from a broker. "Interested in listing the Brooks property? I represent your daughter, Melina." I replied, as if I were exactly what my daughter thought I was, a soft, bewildered widow. "I'm so confused. What property? I haven't agreed to sell. Please remove any listing." Then I forwarded the email to Mr. Peterson. By noon, the agent had sent a panicked apology and taken the listing down. Strike one. I didn't call Melina. I wanted her Europe trip to burn through the money she thought she had. Mr. Peterson had traced the sale of the Ford, a cashier's check cashed at a corner branch, skimpy funds wired to a new account. It wasn't enough to get you a month in Barcelona with a man like Edward, the boyfriend who had consumed my daughter's attention like a slick black hole. He smelled like too much cologne and a good lie. A week passed. The house settled around the quiet. I visited the beach house and sat on the old back steps where the paint peeled like sunburn. The ocean was slate and lovely. A couple of surfers floated beyond the break like patient seals. I told Robert's memory she would sell this for a week in Rome, and the wind whipped my hair in my mouth.
2 weeks. My phone stayed silent. On the 14th day, she called. She always called when she wanted something. "Mom," she said in a rush, "you're impossible to reach. Anyway, just checking in. Did you see the listing? I think we priced it right. The market's a little soft, but—" "Melina," I said, cutting through the sales pitch. "What listing?" "Mom, don't start. The house, the beach house. The one that's wasting away because you're too sentimental to rent it properly. You know the one. No one is going to buy my house. And the truck wasn't yours to sell." Silence. You could hear the way silence changes when a person is calculating. "Mom," she said in the tone she used when she explained things to people she thought were stupid, "I'm trying to look out for you. You're not good at money. Dad handled everything, remember?" "I remember," I said, and smiled. "He did it well." She sighed. "We're in Paris, by the way. Edward got invited to this— Never mind. Look, don't make this hard. The truck is sold. It's done." "It isn't done," I said quietly. "The buyer wants his money back." "What buyer? What are you talking about? Did you get a police report? Because you'll need one." Her breath hitched. "Mom, stop. Don't be dramatic. We're traveling. We can talk when I get back." "You called to ask for more money," I said. I could picture her lips thinning. She hated being seen through. "I called to check on you," she lied. "You've been very fragile. I'm worried. Enjoy Paris. Send me a postcard." And I hung up. Mr. Peterson had sent a polite but stern letter to the listing agent. Any attempt to list or transfer the property without the consent of the trustee will result in legal action. The truck's buyer, a nice man named Jorge, had filed a complaint without my urging because he was not a man with time to be scammed. The bank had flagged the account where the funds went. The Europe credit card began to get declined. Edward, who had delicate tastes and less delicate temper, began to show his teeth. The texts started then, buttered with pleas. "Mom, can you send me $5,000? It's an emergency. Mom, I'm in a foreign country. This is scary. Mom, why are you being like this?" I didn't answer for 2 days. I walked around the house and touched the things that mattered. The dent in the hallway where Melina had slammed a scooter into the wall at 10 years old, the spot in the garden where Robert declared war on a gopher and lost, the pile of bills we could pay without thinking, for once. If you're hearing this and judging me, tell me honestly, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have wired your child a lifeline, no questions asked? Or would you have waited for the lesson to bite? On the third day, Melina called, her voice small. He's mad. Edward's mad. The hotel card declined and he said it was humiliating, and I told him it's a mistake, and he told me to fix it. You don't understand how men like him work, Mom. He's always surrounded by people who have money. I don't know what to do. How did you sell the truck? I asked. She started to cry. My heart tugged like an old stitch. I listed it in Dad's name. I found the paperwork in the desk. I thought it would be fine. People do it all the time. The title, okay, I signed, but it's not like he's here to... She stopped herself, audible horror. I didn't mean that. I closed my eyes. Where are you? She whispered, ashamed. Barcelona. So this was the conference after all. Come home, I said. You can stay at the house. She sniffed. The house? My house, I said gently. The one you tried to sell. There was a long quiet. I'm not a bad person, she said. And in that moment she was 15, hot with indignation after I'd caught her copying a classmate's homework because I have a lot going on, Mom. I know, I said. You're my girl. Come home. When she arrived 4 days later, she looked like a wilted flower in an expensive dress. The gloss had slid off her like a lie in the rain. Edward had not returned with her. He had things to do, she said, and her voice didn't crack on the word like I expected. She dragged a suitcase across the living room, stopped where the light hit the photo of Robert on the mantel, and I watched her eyes climb that mountain of guilt and slide down the other side. I'm sorry, she muttered, for the heat of it all. I thought I was helping. You thought you were moving pieces on a board, not people. She winced. Eat. I added, because that's what mothers say when language runs out. I made grilled cheese and tomato soup. She ate like someone who hadn't in days. I didn't ask, but the purpling bruise under her sleeve told me more than I wanted to know about Edward's temper. I filed that away in a place labeled later. I can fix it, she said into her soup. I can sell something else. The condo. My watch. What condo? I asked, carefully blank. You rent. She looked up, caught, then dropped her gaze. There was no condo. There was a room with a view in someone else's home, and she had imagined it into ownership, because that's what she did, reframed emptiness as abundance. You're staying here, with me. That's the first thing. For how long? And she asked the way she asked, told me she still thought of my house as a temporary dock, not a home base. As long as it takes, I said. And while you're here, you're going to help. She drew back, suspicious. Help with what? Life. The thing that keeps happening while you curate it on a screen. You're going to do laundry and clean floors and answer the door when Mr. Gomez drops off the vegetables and pay him in cash. You're going to come with me to the beach house and scrub the mildew off the pantry shelves. You're going to drive me to the doctor and sit in a plastic chair and read magazines from 2017 without complaining. You're going to earn your sleep. She laughed, one sharp, humorless bark. You're punishing me. I'm teaching you. The difference is whether you learn. She didn't slam a door because at her age, slamming takes energy, but she went to the guest room and cried for an hour. I washed the soup pot and listened. A neighbor dropped off a pie. I put it on the counter and cut a slice and wrapped it and put it on Melina's nightstand without comment. She didn't say thank you, not then, but in the morning the plate was clean and she was at the table with bedhead and a stubborn set to her mouth. What's first, she said, like a soldier reporting for duty in a war she didn't respect. Sheets, I said. Start with clean. We fell into a rhythm that would have seemed absurd to any outsider who thought revenge had to be loud. She mopped and discovered her own hair hides under couches like seaweed. She called utility companies and got stuck in phone trees and learned how to be humble to get a human. She came with me to the beach house and opened the windows and let the ocean sweep stale air out and salt air in. She watched me run a finger along the mantle and say, "Dust tells you where you've forgotten yourself." She tried to apologize again one afternoon, unasked, words tripping into each other like kids in a playground. I held up a hand. "Not yet," I said. "Work first, words later." Meanwhile, Mr. Peterson and I rearranged the world behind the curtains. We moved properties into trusts with names as boring and unyielding as concrete. We called the lumber company and updated beneficiaries. We wrote letters with phrases like "without prejudice" that sound like a threat and a yawn at the same time. We retained a soft-spoken investigator who wore cardigans and had a memory like flypaper. He found that Edward's business trips were often to courthouses. He had debts in 3 states and a gamble for a soul. He had already started to sniff around the edges of Melina's accounts before they froze, and when they iced over, he had turned mean. One night, about 2 weeks into our new arrangement, the doorbell rang at 11:22 p.m. I felt the hairs on my arms rise. Melina was dozing on the couch beside me, a sad little bundle in a hoodie that wasn't hers. I stood and motioned for her to stay. I opened the door an inch. Edward stood on the stoop, his eyes like oiled marbles, his smile tired and false. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, as if he didn't remember my first name after a year of holiday dinners he deigned to attend. "Is Melina home?" "No," I said, because sometimes a lie is a boundary you hammer in with a mallet. He leaned closer, his breath expensive and rotting. "I don't think you understand," he murmured, and there it was, the slip, the voice men use when they like to frighten. "I don't think you understand," I said, matching his quiet and then pushing under it. "There is a complaint with your name buzzing around a prosecutor's desk about a fraudulent sale. Jorge is very thorough. There are also 2 bench warrants attached to your person like hungry children. If you don't leave, I will call a policeman I happen to know socially, and I will invite him to my stoop for tea." He blinked. He was used to me making casseroles and offering holiday napkins with turkeys on them. He wasn't used to me being a wall. He glanced over my shoulder, and I realized how he had seen me all year, as a silhouette in the background. He smiled without humor. "You think you can hide her." "I think I can stand in my own doorway," I said, and closed the door gently, not a slam to invite more banging, just a firm goodnight. He didn't ring again. I stood there listening to his footsteps retreat. When I turned, Melina was standing in the hallway, her face white and fierce. "You could have let him—" "No," I said. She bit her lip. "He would have—" "I know," I said, and the knowing tasted like iron. "You're safe here." She took a breath like someone who had been underwater and had just found surface. She nodded. We sat back down on the couch and watched a game show while the adrenaline leaked out of our muscles, and it was the most domestic terror I've ever known. After that, she softened. Not all at once, not like a movie where a single monologue makes a person cry and change. Little things. She started to say thank you. She started to take out the trash without sighing. She started to pick up the phone when I called from the other room.
One morning, she asked if she could come with me to the food pantry where I'd volunteered with Robert. She carried boxes like a woman paying off a debt to gravity. She met a girl there with a split lip she tried to hide behind her hair. I watched my daughter's face when the girl said, "He says I make him angry. My aunt says I make drama." Melina's eyes were two wells. When we got home, she stood in the kitchen and stared at her hands as if they had secrets. She said, "I did that. I made that kind of choice." I said, "You made a series of choices. That's what choices are. Chains. The good news is you can start a different chain anytime." She said, "How?" And the word broke me a little because it was honest. I said, "By doing the next right thing, and then the one after that, and by not calling theft help and greed efficiency." Around then, Mr. Peterson called. He said, "It's time for the reveal, if you want it." I looked at my daughter asleep on the couch, a book flopped open across her chest. Her hair had grown, and so had the circle of kindness around her eyes. I said, "Not yet. Soon. I want her to feel the ground under her feet before she knows it's gold."
2 more months. We lived. She fixed the hinge on the pantry door with a tutorial and a screwdriver and a look of pride that warmed a room. She made spaghetti and burned the garlic, and we ate it anyway. She got a job cleaning houses through a friend at the pantry and came home with stories of lives you only see when you move other people's furniture. The baby sock behind the couch, the bottle caps lined up on a windowsill like tiny trophies. She made $90 cash and waved it at me, triumphant as a pirate with a chest. "I made this," she said, her face bright in a way I hadn't seen in years. "You did," I said, and pressed the bills back into her hand. "Hold on to the feeling, not the cash." One day, she came into the kitchen while I was making tea, and she said, "Mom," in a tone that had more layers than an onion, "I need to tell you something." I dried my hands and turned. She was wringing her fingers like she had when she was 6 and had knocked over a vase. She said, "I stole from you. I bullied you. I made you small so I could feel big. I called it love when it was laziness. I called it smart when it was selfish. I hurt you, and I hurt Dad's memory. I hurt myself, and I want to make it right, but I don't know how. You know that part in stories where the music swells and the camera zooms in? In real life, it's just the hum of the refrigerator and a bird outside complaining about a cat." I put my hands on her cheeks, grown now and soft where they'd once been apple tough. "I stole from you. I started by saying that," I said. "And then you keep saying it with your actions, and you forgive yourself when you screw up, and you try again." We cried a little. Not the heaving kind, the quiet kind that makes your throat ache. Then we made grilled cheese again, because grief and healing and hunger keep showing up together like triplets. The next morning, I called Mr. Peterson. "It's time," I said. "Bring the boring." He came to the house with a leather pafecase and a bag of scones because he's the kind of man who understands morale. He sat at our kitchen table and lined up papers like we were about to sign a treaty. Melina came in, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and stopped like she'd seen a ghost. "This is Harold. He's a lawyer. Before your father died, he set up some things. I didn't tell you before because you were not ready to hear. I think you might be ready now. If I'm wrong, I'll stop." She looked at me like I'd pulled a rabbit out of a hat. "What things?" Mr. Peterson took over, his voice warm and accountant slow. "Your father loved you both. He was careful. He left assets. Mrs. Brooks has been stewarding them. There are properties. Some you know, some you don't. There is more than enough for security. Not for yachts," he added, and Melina gave a watery smile, "but for life. And there are conditions." "Conditions," Melina said, and the old defensiveness flared and then softened when she looked at my face. "Conditions like stewardship, like learning before using,
like working, even if you don't need to, because work keeps your soul from falling asleep. She nodded slowly, as if translating. "You're rich," she whispered, then corrected herself. We're secure," I said, "because your father was, as you often put it, boring, and because I didn't tell you when you were living as if the world owed you its glossier rooms." She sat down. She stared at the pastry like she might cry about pastry. "I sold your car," she said to the table. "I tried to sell your house. I bought the car back. Well, the trust did. Jorge was paid, he's fine. The house was never going anywhere." She laughed, a real laugh, shocked into humility by paperwork. You let me feel it? I let you feel enough. I don't want to hurt you. I want you to learn. There's a difference." She reached for my hand. "Thank you," she said. Not in a small child way, but like an adult to another adult. "For not throwing me to the wolves. You threw yourself to wolves. I just lit a path home." After Mr. Peterson left, after we'd signed and initialed and agreed, and the scones had been reduced to crumbs, we walked to the beach house. We stood in the doorway and looked at the ocean and the little scuffs in the floor from years of sand in our shoes. "This place is a story," Melina said. "I tried to turn it into an ATM. It's also a place we can use, not just for us." "What do you mean?" she asked, and I told her about the food pantry women, the nights when a woman shows up with a kid on her hip and a bruise she won't name and nowhere to go, the motel rooms that smell like fear, the way a clean bed can feel like a miracle. I told her about the food pantry women, the nights when a woman shows up with a kid on her hip and a bruise she won't name and nowhere to go, the motel rooms that smell like fear, the way a clean bed can feel like a miracle. "What would you think," I said, "if we made this a soft landing? Not forever, but for a night, for a month, for a winter. We can afford it, and if we can, we must." She stood very still. The wind tugged her hair and she let it. "I would think I have a lot to learn," she said, "and I want to." We did it. We called it a retreat because branding helps donations. But inside, it was what it had always been. A place built by love. We worked. We scrubbed. We patched the roof. We brought in bunk beds and quilts. Mr. Gomez brought crates of vegetables and built a ramp. The woman from the food pantry with the split lip came and sat at the kitchen table and cried and ate 3 bowls of stew. Melina made a sign with her neat letters, "Welcome. You're safe." She cried when she hung it up and wiped her face with the back of her hand and laughed at herself. And I loved her then with a ferocity I didn't know how to hold. So I held it in my chest like a jewel.
She took classes, not finance this time, social work, trauma-informed care. She listened more than she spoke. She learned to make forms into bridges, not barriers. She called me from campus to ask me about the difference between sympathy and empathy. "Sympathy says, 'I feel sorry for you,'" I said. "Empathy says, 'I've been to a kind of darkness too. Let me sit with you in yours.'" Every month, Mr. Peterson and I met. We reviewed, we adjusted, the accounts stayed steady. We set up a scholarship fund in Robert's name for women starting over. We named a reading nook in the beach house after him, a silly little plaque that read, "Robert's Promise, You'll Never Be Alone." I touched it every time I passed, like a superstition and a prayer. And Melina? She paid her debt 1,000 invisible ways. She took late-night calls from women in wild fear and stayed on the line until the fear shrank enough for them to hear their own courage. She testified in court for one of them. She filed a police report against Edward and held another woman's hand while she did the same against someone else.
She attended a mediation with Jorge, the truck buyer. Not because she had to, he'd been reimbursed months ago, but because she needed to look a decent man in the eye and apologize. He hugged her. He said, "We all trip." One day, months after the doorbell and the Europe trip and the way my heart had cracked like a dropped plate, she came to me with a folder. She did a budget, she said, half embarrassed, half proud, for the house, for the retreat, for us. I think Dad would like it. I took the papers. They were neat, sensible, hopeful. He'd love it, I said. He'd love you. We drove to the cemetery on a gray afternoon and sat on the little bench by his stone. Melina brushed leaves off the top with her hand. "Hi, Dad," she said, and laughed through her nose at how much like a child she sounded. "I've been stupid," she said, "and you were right. Money makes people weird. I'm learning to be less weird." She looked at me, and I nodded. She looked back at the stone. "I'm trying, Dad," she said. "We're trying." After, we got coffee at the little place that still thinks baristas should wear bow ties. We sat by the window and watched people do their lives. Melina tapped the table with her ring finger, a habit she had as a kid. "Do you think he knows?" she asked. "I think if there's any justice in all the mysteries, he knows. And he isn't surprised." "You didn't go nuclear on me," she said after a while. "You could have. You could have thrown me out. You could have let me get arrested. Would that have worked?" I asked. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe not." She pressed her lips together. "I think this worked better." "Me too," I said, and we clinked paper cups like they were crystal. Sometimes at night, I still hear the old Ford's engine in my head. That steady, loyal chug. It lives in the garage again now, shined up by a man who talks to it like a horse. We take it to the beach house on Sundays. We fill the bed with supplies and flowers and fresh sheets that smell like sun. We park it in the same spot where Robert used to sit on the tailgate and clean fish, and we talk about him like he's at the store, and we'll be back any minute with ice. If you're still with me, if you're listening in your car or on your couch or while you wash your dishes, tell me, be honest, would you have waited this long for payback? Would you have had the patience for a slow revenge that looks like love? People think revenge is fire. Sometimes it's water. It wears a canyon into a hard rock, inch by inch, until the shape of the world changes. Melina and I don't forget. We don't pretend the Europe call didn't happen. There's a scar there. It itches when the weather changes. It warns us. When she gets the itch to do something fast and glossy, she sits with it until it passes. When I get the itch to throw paperwork like daggers, I make tea. We have our little rituals, our little guardrails. Once, not long ago, she brought home a young woman from the shelter who was shaking without moving. Melina made tea the way I do, too strong and then softened with a splash of milk. She put the mug in her hands and sat across from her, and didn't fill the space with words. The woman looked up after a while and said, "Why are you helping me?" Melina looked at me, and I saw a whole film of memory flicker across her face. The phone call in the waiting room, the lies, the doorbell, the door closing, the scones, the beach house, the budget, the stone in the cemetery. She smiled at the woman, gentle and wry, because someone helped me, and because this house is full of good ghosts. There's one more part to this, and it's more confession than twist. The night before we opened the beach house as a shelter, I sat alone in the living room there, the windows open, the sea talking to the shore like it always does. The floor creaked the way it did the year we fixed the joist and laughed about how we were too old to be crawling around under houses. I swear I felt Robert sit down beside me,
Not in a spooky way, just in that way you feel someone you love in the natural things they loved. I said out loud, because I have finally ruined my concern for what people think. We did it, love. The curtain lifted in a breeze. Somewhere a buoy clanged, and in my chest, a little knot that had held tight since the funeral loosened. You know how some knots do that? They don't come undone all at once. They slacken, and then one day you realize you can pull the string free. It was like that. If you ever find yourself holding a manila envelope you don't want to open because it makes a promise you don't want to believe, that you're going to have to be the one to carry on, open it. If you ever hear your child say words that make your love look like
a receipt instead of a life lived, remember this. Love is not a transaction. It's a stubborn, ordinary, everyday choice. And sometimes the most fitting revenge against the people and the parts of ourselves that reduce love to numbers is to insist on its value anyway. A few days after that night in the beach house, life, with all its small and stubborn chores, kept going. The sink leaked, the oven decided it was a philosopher and heated when it felt like it. Melina and I stood with our heads shoved into cabinets and our hands full of screws, laughing about how neither of us knew the difference between a Phillips and a flathead until a YouTube video saved our pride. It sounds silly to say that's where the real healing happened, but I think it might be true. Not in the grand gestures, but in the daily work of carrying the house and each other forward. She started bringing her notebooks home from class and spreading them across the dining table like a cartographer mapping a new country. I'd sit with tea and listen to her talk about risk assessment and safety planning, about the ways people reroute their lives when the bridge they trusted collapses. I learned new phrases, protective factors, survivor-led frameworks, and tucked them beside the old wisdoms my mother taught me, like how to stretch a soup and how to tell when someone needs you to listen more than talk. About 6 months after she came home, I suggested we do something that scared us both. We should host a night, I said. Invite the women who've passed through here if they want to come back. Not a big thing, just soup and candles and stories. Melina paused with a stack of towels in her arms. Stories? She echoed, the word heavy and hopeful. That's what we had, I said. One that almost ended badly, and then changed. We called it homecoming night. We cooked enough soup to float a ship. We set out mismatched bowls, we put flowers on the mantel and turned on the porch light early, like a beacon. The first woman to arrive wore a coat 2 sizes too big and a smile 2 sizes too small. She hugged us both, light as a moth landing. Others came in 2s and 3s. Some stayed on the edges of the room, like deer at a tree line. Some went straight to the kitchen and acted like they'd never left. We didn't ask for stories. We let the room decide. One woman, hair cropped short like fresh grass, stood and cleared her throat and said, "I got my own apartment last week." We clapped like children. Another laughed and cried at once, talking about a new job at a bakery where the owner calls her kid and means it kindly. A young girl, 18 and hard-eyed, the way you get when you've had to build your own bones, sat beside Melina and whispered so low I couldn't hear. And Melina laughed softly in response and touched the girl's hand. I watched her, my daughter, the one who once told me efficiency mattered more than feelings, as she offered no advice, no lecture, just presence. It was a revenge I hadn't planned, a quiet do-over the universe granted us. She became for others the safe person she'd refused to let me be for her. At the end of the night, After the last bowl was washed and the last hug lingered at the door, Melina and I stood on the porch and breathed the salt. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd wired the money that day?" she asked. "Every now and then," I said. "It would have been easier in the moment. No panic, no confrontation." I looked at her profile, strong and softened. "I think I would have lost you in some other, quieter way." She looked at me, the porch light making her eyes gold. "I think you would have lost me to the part of me that believed money fixes love." "And now?" I asked. She smiled, the kind of smile that builds a bridge between yesterday and tomorrow. She said, "Now I know money can fix a roof, but love is what keeps the door open." We had setbacks, of course. If I told you we never argued again, I'd be lying, and you'd know it. Grief doesn't wrap itself up and walk away. It leaves fingers on the doorknobs of your days. Some mornings I woke up furious at Robert for leaving me, at Melina for almost leaving me in a different way, and at myself for every way I'd failed to set boundaries earlier. Some afternoons, she snapped at me for moving the towels or for forgetting an appointment, and I snapped back, and then we both went quiet and called it. In those moments, our revenge plan looked less like a chessboard and more like a garden. You weed, you water, you apologize for stepping on the thyme, you keep tending. Edward didn't disappear like a bad dream. He resurfaced twice. The first time, he sent a text that began with baby and ended with a demand for money dressed as an opportunity. Melina handed me the phone like she was handing over a cigarette she'd almost lit. We blocked the number. The second time, he tried to pass through the shelter in a different form, through someone else's chaos that bore his fingerprints. We helped her file a restraining order. We walked her through the courthouse metal detector and sat on a hard bench while the hum of fluorescent lights did that thing where it makes you feel like you're thinking underwater. Melina squeezed my hand and I squeezed back, and when the judge spoke, she didn't flinch. That felt like a strange victory, but a real one. And then there was the day the old Ford gave up a gasp and wouldn't start. I sat on the driveway, defeated in a way that felt outsized. It was a machine. Things break. But I cried like it was a friend who had finally admitted it couldn't carry me anymore. Melina knelt beside me, her hands on my shoulders. She said, "We'll fix it, or we'll let it go right, the way that Dad would with ceremony."
We found a mechanic who treats engines like violins. He coaxed life back into it. When it turned over, the sound was rough and perfect. We drove it straight to the beach house and parked it like a beloved old relative. We placed our palms on the warm hood and closed our eyes. "Thank you," I said. To the truck, to Robert, to the stubbornness in both. What I haven't told you yet, because it's the sort of thing you hold close until you know if it's going to last, is that I started something of my own in the middle of all this. In the evenings, after the house quieted and the ocean did its steady breath, I began writing little letters to Robert. Not the kind you send, obviously, the kind that live in a notebook that smells like paper and time. I wrote about the mundane, the oven that thinks too much, the way Melina bites the inside of her cheek when she's focused, the stray cat who adopted our porch. I wrote about big things. The first woman who stayed 3 months and left us a note that read, "I slept without waiting for footsteps." The day we received the nonprofit certification, a bureaucratic miracle that made me sit on the kitchen floor and laugh. The morning I woke up and for the first time in a long time, didn't brace for a lack. Writing to him became another form of revenge against the chaos that tried to rewrite our story. A way of saying, no, this is what happened. We kept our promise. Melina found the notebook once, by accident. She didn't read it. She closed it and brought it to me like it was fragile and precious. "I won't," she said quickly, and I believed her. That trust, such a small sentence, such a large gift. We had our 1-year celebration for the house in late summer. We put streamers up like teenagers. Mr. Peterson came with his Labrador and an old man bandana, and the dog put his head in my lap like we'd known each other all our lives. The mayor came and did the small town politician thing. Ribbon, scissors, words. It didn't matter. What mattered was the handful of women who stood in the back, arms crossed against their chests, not because they were closed, but because they'd learned to self-hold. They clapped at the wrong times and laughed at the right ones. They ate cake standing up. One of them, her cheeks round and new with safety weight, took my hand and said, "You could have sold this place. You didn't." I smiled and said the truest thing. We almost did. We're grateful we didn't. If you've stayed with me this long, maybe it's because you've had something almost taken from you. By a person you love, by a version of yourself that didn't know better, by life. Maybe you're listening and nodding at the parts that hurt. Maybe you're arguing with me at the parts where I chose the long road. That's fair. Be honest. Would you have waited as long as I did? Would you have risked the silence and the long lesson? Or would you have thrown thunderbolts and watched them hit? The last piece of this story happened on a day like any other. Gray morning, coffee, a grocery list with too many items that start with C. Melina came in with her school bag and a flyer she'd made. "We're hosting a workshop," she said, breathless with good energy. "Financial safety for women starting over. You know, the basics. Credit freezes, safe accounts, spotting scams." She paused, then added, "I want to teach the part about how to ask for help without shame." I sat with that. My daughter, who once called dependence weakness, wanted to teach asking. "I think you'd be good at it," I said. She looked at me like she was stepping off a dock into the water for the first time. "I think so too," she said. Will you come? Sit in the back and make faces if I get too preachy?" "I'll bring a bell and ring it when you do," I teased, and she laughed. The workshop was beautiful, in the way real things are. Messy, full of interruptions, women talking over each other because ideas are bouncing and landing like little birds. Melina stood at the whiteboard with a marker and drew boxes and arrows. "This isn't about being perfect," she said, and I heard her voice wobble and steady. "It's about practical steps and forgiving yourself when you misstep." A woman raised her hand and asked what to do when the person threatening her was family. The room went quiet. Melina put the marker down and said, "You draw a line. You stand in your doorway. You say no. And if you can't do it alone, you call someone. Call us." After, we sat on the steps with paper cups of lemonade. An older woman with a careful bun stopped in front of us. "Your daughter," she said to me, as if sharing a secret, "is very good at this." I looked at Melina. She rolled her eyes in a "don't embarrass me" way and pressed my shoulder into hers. On the drive home, the late light slanting over the ocean in that way that makes you believe in paintings, she said, very softly, "Mom? Yes? Thank you for being the net and the knife." I frowned, unsure, and she laughed at my confusion. "The net that caught me, and the knife that cut me loose when I was tangled in my own mess." I took a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for a year. I said, "You were worth catching, and you did the hard work of cutting." We passed the old pier. It creaked and groaned, still standing. I thought of Robert, of his envelope, of the way he had trusted me to make the hard decisions without becoming hard myself. I thought about how revenge had never once felt like glee to me. It had felt like discipline, like holding the line, like choosing the story on purpose. Here's the part where I wrap it up, I guess, the part where I tell you we lived happily ever after. That's not our brand of truth. We live fully ever after. We mess up and fix it. We grieve and celebrate. We lock the door and open it again the next day. We drive the old Ford slowly, carefully, like a prayer.
If you're out there in your own waiting room, metaphorical or otherwise, staring at a phone that just delivered news that made your stomach drop. Hear me. There might be a manila envelope somewhere in your life. Maybe it's a literal one with papers and passwords. Maybe it's a friend who knows how to be boring in all the right ways. Maybe it's the quiet courage to say no, even when it trembles in your mouth. Maybe it's the patience to let a person you love meet the edge of consequence without pushing them off it yourself. And if you're listening and you're the Melina in your story, the one who got clever in all the wrong places, know that shame's a poor teacher. It keeps you small and secret. Accountability is better. It's heavier, yes, but it builds muscle. You can start again. You can come home, not to the house you tried to sell, though maybe that too, but to the part of yourself that knows how to love without needing to own. Sometimes revenge isn't about ruining someone. It's about rebuilding what they tried to take and setting a rule they can't ignore. It's about making sure the next time they reach for harm, they find a boundary that stands up. It's about turning the beach house someone tried to price into a place you can't price at all. So tell me, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have picked the quiet fight, the paperwork, the waiting, the soup? Or would you have slammed doors and let the sirens sing? And tell me where you're hearing this. In a bus on your way to a job you fought hard to keep? In a kitchen where the light falls just so? On a walk where the wind yanks your hair and you laugh anyway? Your stories travel farther than you think. Please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're hearing my story of revenge. I want to know how far it's gone. As me, tomorrow I'm going to the beach house early to put fresh flowers on the table. Melina will come after class with paint on her wrist and a new story from someone brave. We'll open the windows and let the sea in. We'll brew coffee too strong. We'll fix whatever small thing has decided to break, because something always does. We'll move through the rooms, touching the places that hold memory, checking the locks, fluffing the pillows, placing a folded blanket at the end of each bed like a promise. Before the women arrive, I'll stand on the back steps where the paint peels a little and look at the line where the ocean meets the sky. I'll say, out loud, to the man who taught me that love is logistics with a soul, "We're doing it, Robert." The breeze will lift the hair at my neck. Somewhere a gull will heckle me. I'll laugh. I'll go back inside. And when the doorbell rings and I open it, the woman on the porch will be whatever she is that day, frightened, furious, numb, hopeful, and I'll say the words that carried me through the worst and into the work. You're safe. Come in. That, in the end, is my revenge. Not that I got even, that I got us home.